Hi, this is Kendra from Pencil and Pigment, and today I wanted to do sort of a story time and talk about blues in history. Now, blues in history aren't really controversial or anything. I won't be talking about indigo. I have two videos about that pigment, and I'll link them all in the description box below if you're curious, because indigo itself is incredibly fascinating. So we're going to try and get through as many as possible, and I just won't be able to. There's so many. So tomorrow for my story time, I'm going to talk about a couple others and do as many as I can get through today. So the first one I wanted to talk about was Egyptian blue. Now, Egyptian blue was created by the Egyptians in 2200 BC, and they used a mix of limestone and sand and copper minerals to create this color. And with most of these colors that we will be talking about today, they are all created as an alternative to ultramarine because of the lapis lazuli. We will get to that. So that's what Egyptian blue was. They had access to the lapis lazuli, but it was just too hard to get to. So for the Egyptians, they created their own. And what they would do is they would heat these minerals to about 1470 or 1650 Fahrenheit, and it would create this glass. And with this glass, they would crush it and put it with binders. And that is how they got Egyptian blue. Now this paint, how they made this paint, was lost. By the time ancient Rome was going strong, the recipe for this was completely gone, and it wasn't rediscovered until the 19th century. And by then we had so many other alternatives that this one wasn't such a big deal, but they found, oh my gosh, I'm telling you, scientists are the real winners in all these stories. Scientists found in 2006 that Egyptian blue emits infrared radiation, so it's really easy for them to see which ancient artifacts contain this color, because they just shine the infrared light on it, which is amazing. So that kind of brings us to Azurite. Azurite is also an ultramarine alternative, though it was used, it's older than that pigment. And that one is also a semi-precious stone. So if you're interested in geology, there is a lot of overlap between art and pigments and rocks. And this was used in Europe, but the most interesting thing about this is how Japanese artists decided to use it. So Japanese artists who didn't want to add white to their paintings would adjust particle size for shading. So they would mill it in all these different particle sizes, and the larger the particle size, the darker the color, and the smaller the particle size, the lighter the color. And I just think that that is a really cool discovery on their behalf. Another color I want to talk about is the one that's the most problematic, I suppose, and that would be natural ultramarine. So natural ultramarine is made from crushing lapis lazuli stone, which is a semi-precious stone, and it is mined in Afghanistan, and that is a huge problem. It is time consuming, it is difficult, and when they started doing it, it had to be shipped, so Italian tradesmen would take it over to Europe on their boats, and that was really expensive. So the entire process for ultramarine is too expensive, too difficult, and just too time consuming, which is why it was the same price as gold. To buy actual ultramarine paint was a fortune that many people just could not afford to pay. So, to make this pigment from ultramarine, you have to sort of knead it into a powder, into like a putty, and then you place it into an alkaline solution, and the blue pigment actually drops out into the bottom of the container, and you can keep doing this process over and over for a lighter and lighter ultramarine and sort of create an ultramarine ash and use it as a wash if you feel so inclined. But it is just way too expensive and pricey. So that brings us to synthetic ultramarine. Synthetic ultramarine, they had a contest in Paris, and it was some sort of competition, and that is when synthetic ultramarine was created. Now, synthetic ultramarine is sort of made with clay, silica, sulfur, rosin, and then charcoal that's slowly heated. And they discovered this. So sometimes you will see synthetic ultramarine labeled as Paris Blue because that's where it was created and discovered. And this was, they couldn't get this on shelves fast enough. So this was created in 1826, and then it became commercially available in 1828. And because it was so cheap, so accessible, so like chemically identical to natural ultramarine, that it just took off in every way imaginable. And they even sold it as sort of a laundry bluing agent to make fabric whiter. So that's another thing that synthetic ultramarine was used for. And then comes Prussian Blue. So all of these pigments and things have really interesting sort of touted names. And when I did the purples and browns last week, mauve was considered the first synthetic dye. Well, Egyptian blue is considered the first synthetic pigment, and Prussian blue is considered the first modern synthetic pigment. So they just can't hand out like first place labels fast enough with some of these things. And Prussian blue, as the legend goes, was created on accident, which, I mean, if all my accidents led to the creation of blue pigments, I would be I would be overjoyed. So, a gentleman named Johann Dybach, who was a dye maker, was looking to create a red dye, and he didn't have, I'm going to simplify this, but he didn't have the right sort of salts as a binder. It was sort of a, yeah, we'll say it that way. Salts as a binder. And so he used one that had animal blood in it instead. And the red dye with the animal salt binder with the blood combined to make a blue. Now, so it's the potassium of a salt binder, the blood, the iron sulfate, and this made an iron ferrocyanide. And because of this, it became available in about 1710, and it led to the creation of, later on, of blueprints and cyanotape in the mid-19th century. So this was the precursor to that, which I think is incredibly awesome. Now, cobalt, which is also called Thenard's blue, was actually commissioned. So a man named Thenard was commissioned by a French minister, like you do apparently, and to create a more light fast solution to Prussian blue and something more affordable than ultramarine. And he combined aluminum oxide, heated it with a cobalt arsenate, and blue thenard began being produced in 1807, and they later changed the name to cobalt blue. So a lot of these blues in history were just a affordable solution to the huge problem of ultramarine and just how vastly costly that pigment was to everybody involved. And I hope this was interesting. The history of blue, it just, every time a new one was created, it exploded and artists went wild. And I will link some famous paintings that include these different blues from these eras. So if you want to explore further and see what some of the art looked like, that will be available to you. And then tomorrow I'm going to talk about a couple newer, more modern blues in my Draw With Me. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye.